Or other people said, I'll be happy to kind of house someone who's homeless at this point. And so, and everywhere in between. And so that's another conversation we can have. But these conversations, this is written up here between and among people with sanctioned power and citizens, but it can also be between citizens or between people who have sanctioned power, not just between sanctioned power and citizens. Between with people who stand up in front of a room and hopefully people in the room who want to create a new future. We can change the room by changing the conversation. We can change and shift the nature of our conversations. We can have a brand new conversation, or we can alter the conversation in a way that can make a big difference in terms of where we need to go. And then we start off with a powerful question. Often we start off with a powerful question. One of the questions that your small group is going to answer tonight is this. So you may want to start thinking about what is the one thing you, as an individual, believe would be good for the future of Longmont that you'd be willing to participate in. And so these questions, there's a couple criteria, there's a few criteria for a powerful question. I said before in this room, a powerful question isn't along the lines of how can we get people to make more commitment? How can we get people to show up on time? How can we get people to take accountability? Those are questions that have kind of a manipulative tenor to them. We're not talking about those kinds of questions. We're talking about questions that when we ask the question, we say, well, it's personal. And there's no yes or no answer. There's some ambiguity to it. And then there's also some kind of anxiety related to it. So if I was to ask somebody, what have you contributed to that what you're complaining about the most, for instance? What would that look like for you? That requires you to kind of do something different internally with yourself. And so those are the kind of questions we're talking about. And then it's intended to enhance, all of this is intended to enhance accountability, commitment, and action. And so, we can get accountability and commitment. Some people in this room and some people in other rooms have said, yeah, I'll be accountable, yeah, I'll make a commitment. But if they take no action, really all we've done, we really haven't done that much. Really, the room might have become a little more general, so to speak. But this whole action piece becomes important as we move forward. Okay, leveraging stewardship principles for the good of the whole. One of the things we have coming up, the School of Statesmanship, Stewardship, and Service has coming up in September. The last 3 Wednesdays in September, the first 2 Wednesdays in October, I believe it's Wednesday, right? Is a series of 5 classes that SOSSAS is presenting. And we're going to begin the conversations over 15 weeks. The first 5, we do it in 5-week cycles. But they're going to be on stewardship, this idea of being a servant leader in our community. And so we're really going to emphasize that. This is a way of leadership that hasn't been taught in this community that I'm aware of, in terms of having people hear what being a steward, a good steward is. Sometimes we hear the word steward or the word stewardship associated with land. We're honoring the land. Well, how do we honor people? How do we honor and respect people so that we do the things that we've been talking about up until now? How do we do that in a way where people really do believe they can bring their gifts to the table, where they really do believe their voice counts, their thoughts matter, and that their humanness is valued? They really do believe that their part can be a part that's part of the whole that's greater than they are. That's the kind of leadership we're talking about in terms of how do we do that now? And I see some people in this room that have been elected officials, that want to be elected officials, that have tried to be elected officials. I see some other people in this room that have been in positions in this community with kind of some power, some officially sanctioned power in this community. And so those are the kinds of things we think leaders need to be thinking about in terms of stewardship principles. So leveraging stewardship principles for the good of the whole discusses the ideals of what it means to be more powerfully in service to the public good. What is the purpose of the private and public sectors when it comes to the common good? These are all questions we're going to answer. What is the right use of power? We have another class that we teach, repurposing our institutions. What's that look like? We're not talking about that right now, but our institutions, many of them, including the ones in criminal justice and police and fire and those first responders, are kind of, there's some old models going on right now. There's some models that have reached a diminishing point of return. And I dare say that that's probably the case for a lot of our institutions. And so what do we need to do to repurpose institutions in a way that they can begin to serve the good of the whole, that they can begin to see that their role is one of stewardship. And so I'm going down to that last one. How do we begin to sustain narratives and conversations that speak to the deeper level of service beyond the ideas of social responsibility and social entrepreneurship toward the ideal of the whole and a commitment to the common good? So again, that might sound a little bit abstract, but it's something that we get into very deeply in these classes. So keep that in mind, especially if you want to be an elected official or if you're a leader. I think these classes will be very helpful for you. So that's where I'm going to end, and I'm going to pass this off to Carol Engel. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, Wednesday, we'll get more information out, but Chamber, you know where the Chamber of Commerce is, there's that little classroom in there, there's like 30 seats. We'd love to see you there. All right, there you go.
6 to 7:30. So hi, for anybody that's new, I'm Carol. Where are we? I have a background in education. I taught up at Colorado State University, and I taught in design and merchandising. So how do we want to sell this city? I always think about that, and thinking about the goodness. As we came upon this, we sat with Eric and we mapped out these 8 sessions. What could we talk about? Growth is a controversial subject, is it not? Some people like growth, some people want no growth, some people want to create new things, some people don't. And so we're here. SOSSAS is a nonpartisan, non-ideological organization, nonprofit. We were established from a group of citizens that answered an invitation from a letter to the editor in 2021. And we worked for 2 years to think about what it would take to put the framework together. But in my CSU experience, I worked a lot with creating clusters. So we're going to talk about that. Has anybody ever heard about clustering? And if you're reading Abundance, or if you're hearing some of the more current themes that are happening, it is how do communities prosper and grow by kind of this collectiveness of, anyway, and I'll get more to that research. So when we talk about the inevitability of growth, how many believe that growth is just going to happen? Maybe, particularly in Boulder County. I come from a little, what kind of growth? Okay, that's a great question. I come from a little dryland farm community that now has a downtown that has all plywood across all downtown stores. The stores that I remember growing up in, working in, walking downtown, together. We were always together. So as you think about the choice between brownfield, 2 weeks ago we talked, Burkett was here, and that was a new term for me. I'm learning so much by going through and putting together these sessions. Brownfield is that blighted, that unused building, that eyesore, and what do we do with it next, right? So nothing changes, or brownfield, something new is created, designed, built, right? We're going to talk about some of that tonight. With growth comes job creation, increases in tax revenue. Now we're going to push on you a little bit tonight and make you take home some homework assignments. Do you know where our income comes from for the city? Do you know how much income we have? Do you know if it's sustainable? Is it all taxes? Is it all, we're here to educate. And believe me, I have been educated putting this together for the last 2 weeks. When we increase tax revenue, do we get a consequence of more infrastructure? Is that good for us? Again, the question of goodness with growth. With growth may come increased cost of living. Some of you may be experiencing that, a strain on our resources. City government has to do more, maybe with less. And the potential environmental, we covered environment. The consequences when growth slows or goes to zero are that you have a reduction. You might have economic stagnation. You have less taxes coming in, so all of a sudden budgets don't meet. You have decreased opportunities. Think about my little Kansas town. It's all boarded up. It's gone sinking in population. Nobody wants to move there anymore. So a potential decline in the quality of life. We know the Boulder Valley School District is now on a decline. They're having to think about closing schools because there is reduced growth. So what can bring more economic activity? Some of you may go, well, we don't want it. We don't want it. Okay, let's talk about that. We're here to have conversation, right? Do we want more income and resources for our city, and how do we make that happen? Do we plan it? Do we discuss it? Do we think about it? Okay. So I'm just going to say from my own research point of view, I put together a summit that brought a lot of business owners together. We started talking through these subjects. It was in the apparel industry, in the manufacturing part, so all the active and outerwear companies, we were bringing them together. We found out that everybody kind of had the same needs. So we started into this cluster collaboration, and that led to a really nice grant from the National Science Foundation for the Science of Organizations. And now we're starting to read about it. If you read the book Abundance, it'll talk about these clusters, where they happen. I will tell you Boulder, Larimer County, and now we're going to include Weld County because they're growing too. We're clustering. We're bringing in talent that can have new startups, new businesses, new enterprises. Corporate might, do you agree with that? Maybe a little bit. The talent comes in. People want to live here. There was a recent study, the most peaceful city in the United States. Did anybody know what it was? Fort Collins. What was the second one? Boulder. We happen to be right in between. Thinking about shared, a 10-minute walk. Everybody had 10 minutes of access to a park. I would say Boulder, or Longmont has that as well. Shared infrastructure and capital, healthy competition, and social networking. So people coming together. This gathering itself, as we start to do this, I was thinking today about what will this look like next year? Will we fill the Stewart Auditorium? Will we fill Vance Brand? Can we think bigger, right? All right, so I happened to live in Boulder before I moved to Longmont, and I worked in Fort Collins. So I commuted through Loveland every day. I thought it would be interesting to compare what happened in the last 30 years. You can see in 1975, actually I guess we're going back 40 years, you can see that we were the smallest town. These are estimates. You can also see that we have grown, not as much as Fort Collins, but a little more than Loveland, and we're now starting to outpace Boulder. Now some of those numbers, I'm depending on AI, so if I'm wrong on exact numbers, just forgive me. Jake said, well, what do the budgets look like as you put those together? So I pulled everything up, and I also pulled up the strategies around how each municipality has grown. Boulder has worked on their transportation, their sustainability planning, and open space preservation. So if you were living in Boulder back in the years, which I was, we knew about open space. I also sold our family farm to open space. So I've had that kind of experience with it. In Longmont, we worked with Envision Longmont. Now some people go, well, that was an old plan. Yeah, 2015. But it was a good strategic planning process that included a lot of people. Does it maybe need an update? Maybe. We certainly have beautiful infrastructure. And in 4 weeks, we'll be talking about that infrastructure. We have great park systems. How many of you enjoy the parks in Longmont? Right? So we should have been included. Now, as you look at these comparisons on budgets, you can see Boulder has 400 for their general budget, and then another 990 million for capital projects. We have 469 for the general fund and 127 for capital improvement. Loveland has 555, but that includes their capital improvement. So you can't really across the board. And budgeting is confusing. The homework you're going to get tonight includes a little video to look at that. Susie's here. She knows that budgeting is hard. It's pages and pages of numbers. And then Fort Collins, 809. I watched that city grow as I was there for many years, 15 years of working. And I'm going to turn it over to David. And David, I was really excited that as I looked at this background, David was working. You came from Boulder, right? No. Where'd you come from? East Coast. But then he helped Boulder. And you know, if you've lived in what? Then you came to Longmont. Came to Longmont as the Longmont Urban Renewal Authority Director. Now, I didn't even know. How many knew before tonight that Longmont had an Urban Renewal Authority? About half of you. So, so I'm just saying, this information needs to get out. He was the redevelopment manager for the city of Longmont, and he worked in partnership. He works with public-private partnership, which I've always known is the answer. If we think about it, we can't always do everything. You know, it's risky to put millions of dollars into a project and not know what the results are going to be. If you were ever an entrepreneur or a small business owner, it's very risky. It's taking your time and your money and your treasures. And so David, and then he's gone on his own with Civistruct. I want you to tell us all about it and what he did while he was in Longmont.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Carol and Mike. So, as Carol mentioned, my name is David. So I'm currently a real estate development consultant. I'm also an aspiring real estate developer, trying to build some single-unit housing here in Longmont along the St. Rain Creek corridor. But prior to that, I spent 8 years with the city of Longmont, as Carol mentioned, doing the Urban Renewal Authority and also redevelopment manager, kind of serving as a liaison between the city and developers to build kind of catalyst projects. And you probably know, during the time I was with the city, we had the mall redevelopment, we had Butterball, we had Roosevelt Park Apartments, and we also had Cheese Importers, which is actually adaptive reuse of the old city's first power plant. So I'm going to kind of highlight two case study examples. It would be Roosevelt Park Apartments and Butterball to kind of peel back the layers about why cities and why government does P3s, public-private partnerships, kind of understanding the economics of the deal, because not everyone understands, like, why does government get involved in development when a development should be able to pay its own way? And particularly for catalyst projects that have lots of issues, this is a good important role for government to kind of jumpstart development, working in collaboration with developers that could lead to additional growth and development and meet some of the goals of the community in terms of missing retail or missing housing and stuff like that. So I'm just going to kind of highlight, kind of during my time, the philosophy of P3s that, when I was with the city, and then kind of talk about these projects. I like this quote from Debbie Millman. Development takes a freaking long time, especially new built construction. It's very challenging. The financing, the carrying costs. A lot of times people think developers are like greedy and they make a lot of money, but we have to carry projects for years and years and years when there's no revenue coming in. And so it can be a real challenge, particularly for a small developer or one that doesn't have a great track record, to kind of build what we hope is cool projects. Obviously there's formulaic developers, the big ones that just build, 5-story apartments, 300 units left, right, and whatever. But if you do something interesting and cool, usually it's developers that don't have that kind of cool track record. And if you look behind that thing here, this is Cheese Importers. Back when they had the cafe open, I really miss that. You know, and when COVID hit, they closed, and you know, Claire, White, and Sam, I love those guys. You know, they never brought it back. So, I mean, Cheese Importers is such a destination for Longmont, and I was so happy that the city decided to help invest in that project. If you remember, that used to be the old power plant, and it used to be, back in the day, excess storage for the museum. It had 45,000 pieces of artifacts and 1 employee. So it wasn't exactly the highest and best use of that First and Main area. And so I give credit to council. We understood, you know, we executed a lease with Cheese Importers. They came and moved in. They put in $1 million into the building, renovated it. And now, you know, they're doing great. But they wanted to buy it because, you know, they're a legacy family. They've been here for 30 years. They were, you know, they didn't want to leave Longmont. And so luckily, I give thanks to the city council at that time. They agreed. They wanted to keep Cheese Importers in the community, and they agreed to sell the property to them. And now Cheese Importers is still there. I think they're doing great. So I just really happy that it's such a great family, and that the city council was really observant and understood the value of keeping them in Longmont. So in terms of the P3 philosophy, you know, why does government get involved in development projects? You know, again, my time with Longmont, we evaluated projects on a case-by-case basis. You know, what's the project catalytic? Could it spur additional development? We also looked at the economic and fiscal impact. So if the city invests $10 million in a project, what is it going to be their ROI in terms of new tax revenue coming in? You know, this classic but-for argument. You know, the mall was one example. You know, the mall was a dead mall, Dillard's was hanging on, and everything else closed. The city invested $27.9 million to a bond to help fund that project in terms of eligible cost public infrastructure, but it is generating way more sales tax revenue than it did before. And I always quote Jim Golden, the former finance director for Longmont. You know, it performed remarkably well. Sometimes there's a lot of risk where project doesn't generate the tax revenue, and the city has to step in and cover that. Not with those at the peaks. It generated much more sales tax to help service the debt on that, and now when the debt is paid off, that sales tax revenue continues to the city. So the city had a lot of different tools that, you know, again, this is back in the day, but I think they're still applicable today in terms of the toolbox, you know, in terms of what government can do. You know, we can do development fee waivers and rebates. We can do credits in terms of water taps. We have the urban renewal district, which uses tax increment financing. When, again, it's the incremental increase in value that can go back to pay for eligible public costs. Yes? Oh, public-private partnership. P3s, sorry, yes. The city planning department, because everything that you want to build in Longmont has to come through planning. They can do expedited development review. I know they do it for affordable housing. There's brownfield grants. I'll talk about that with Roosevelt Park Apartments. Downtown's got a great, the DDA's got a great incentive program to help facilitate new businesses opening in downtown through facade grants and using their TIF. And then infrastructure investment. So when the city does a public-private partnership, the main thing is what's called a redevelopment agreement. This outlines the roles and responsibilities of all the parties in terms of what the city contributes and does, and what the developer has to do, and what the developer has to perform to do. So you have to have a negotiation between that. You know, a strong partnership is so key, because if both parties aren't in alignment with their vision, it makes things really kind of complicated. But the city has to have the vision, and you know, with the mall redevelopment, they had the vision of redeveloping that mall through the urban renewal district, and luckily Newmark Merrill came in, was able to, you know, implement the vision. You know, the 3 key things back in the day was a new movie theater, Whole Foods, and then obviously Sam's Club as well. And I know everyone has a different opinion about, you know, the development, but ultimately, you know, that was done there. I think there's a lot less sales tax revenue generating uses, more services than the original vision, but I think it is done okay. So I'll talk about Roosevelt Park Apartments real quick. This was developed by Cotton Burden. Burden Incorporated is a longtime Colorado and actually Longmont developer. You know where it is. So it's just in Roosevelt Park along Main Street, just Longspeak Avenue. So this is it was 6 different parcels the developer assembled over a period of years. It was a contaminated site. There was no gas station there, so it was a brownfield redevelopment. They had overhead utility lines, and the zoning didn't allow that kind of mixed-use apartment development. So, according to the developer, the greatest obstacle, and this is what it used to look like on that site, was, the environmental cleanup, and then, kind of the design and planning to cure that cleanup and pay for those costs. The developer initiated their own kind of environmental due diligence. They received some grants from the state through the Petroleum Storage Tank Fund. OPS, which is a state agency, helped cover additional costs for the cleanup. And the city and Longmont DDA made additional public investment. That was through kind of the garage. So not all the parking in the garage is for the apartments, it's also for public space as well. So this is kind of see what it was done. It was a $21 million investment. There's 115 residential units with some ground floor commercial, retail. There's the brewery down there. There also was back in the day art space, as well as 206 parking spaces. So, again, why does government invest? Again, the philosophy is the project in the community interest. Is there a reasonable probability to success? What is the justification for need? It's this classic but-for argument. And so a lot of times, government, in terms of their investment, helps fill as part of the capital stack for the developer, like, but for this investment, the project wouldn't occur. Because if the developer doesn't receive a reasonable return on investment, they're not going to move forward. And so if government can step in and help pay for public costs, public infrastructure, that lowers the cost of capital to the developer and makes that project much more viable. So you can see for Cotton Burden, this thing took 11 years from when he acquired the old restaurant there to when it was completed and opened in 2014. So development is a long process where this developer was carrying this cost for 11 years before any revenue was being generated. And why was this project good for downtown? It touched on the 15 of the 29 goals for the downtown master plan. It really added new vibrancy to an area that didn't have apartments. There was no market rate apartments back in the day before Butterball came in with South Main Station. So this was the pioneering project for that. And it provided incubation art spaces as well. And then obviously the additional parking. So here's this kind of a little pie chart of the financing. Bank financing was about 50% of the deal. The developer contributed about 24% in equity. Then the DDA incentives were about 18%, and the city investment was about 7%, and then some state funding. So here's the public sector capital stack. Total about $5 million. Most of that, or half of that, or less than half of that, was tied to the parking garage, and that was through the DDA. With additional facade improvement grant, the city waived some development fees, helped pay for some infrastructure, and some state funding. Why was the project successful? And again, it was a shared purpose between the DDA, the city, and the developer to kind of revitalize downtown. The developer acquired all the property, so he really was able to bring a fully baked project downtown to be developed. So my last one, sorry, running out of time here, I'll be quick. So you probably all remember this. Back in the day. Yeah, the turkey. I have a video when they swung the ball to knock down the first of that tilt-up concrete.
This was known in Longmont as the turkey factory. And I had a window that when all the new turkeys came in, the ones were sitting out the window hoping some of them could escape. And we would watch them run away, and people were running after them. So anyway, this plant was very cautious. They all plugged up.
Yeah. So Butterball, it actually is 7 different parcels. So it was about 27 acres. So this developer, Brian Baer from MEQ, acquired the property from Butterball with the goal of trying to reimagine and redevelop the site into a mixed-use commercial residential development. So it opened in 1950, was vacated in 2011. Again, it occupies the southern gateway to downtown. It's like, this is the first thing you see driving in. It's not exactly like welcoming back in the day. So it was industrially zoned. So the city, they rezoned the property mixed use to permit the kind of residential use to come in. The city had, the challenges. Again, it was blighted. There was a high level of development risk for the developer here, because again, this is kind of an industrial area. There was a lot of retail vacancy back in the time along Main Street. It had significant demolition and site costs, to kind of get it going. And I'll kind of talk about this in a little bit. Again, you had the railroad tracks right there. You know, blaring the horn, coming all the way through. And is there quiet zones yet downtown? I don't even know. I assume they're like triple pane glasses, in terms of the people that live there, and they don't hear it. But again, you had these marginal industrial uses that in this area that made it challenging. But again, the goal was to kind of reinvigorate this kind of downtown area, really provide some additional residential development. And what's in plan now, you probably see, is the granary. So the old grain silo right next to Brewing is part of the Butterball plan, and right now they're in plans to do a ground floor food hall with office and commercial upstairs. So it's a kind of a cool concept. Again, helping to reinvigorate this area, but preserve the existing silo. If you've ever been in that silo, I mean, I toured it, a couple of years ago. I mean, it was just completely obliterated in there. So again, there's a lot of cost. Yes, Jenny. Yes. So the city, again, this is a $100+ million development. The city, again, it was about a $6 million investment. The biggest thing that the city did, I thank the former public works director for thinking outside the box. Because usually public works are my nemesis in terms of trying to get projects done and through there is Butterball had 2 4-inch water taps on that site. It's in the world of development, 2 4-inch water taps is worth like $1 bazillion. And typically the taps stay with the land. So as part of the P3, the city allowed the value of those 2 4-inch taps to be reallocated to the other Butterball parcels. In essence, by providing a credit to allow the developer to redevelop those additional parcels, because if not, those taps would be wasted. And so I thought that was a great idea in thinking outside the box from the city perspective to how to facilitate this development. Because usually it's like, no, you can't do that or whatever. But it adds value and it doesn't cost the city anything. It's like the city isn't having to fund it out of the general fund. It's applying those credits to facilitate the granary building, the Wibby redevelopment, as well as the remaining Butterball redevelopment. The city also contributed to, again, $500,000 to the railroad crossing improvements. I guess it's being done in terms of ultimately being a quiet zone, but the goal was to, the railroad, it's like you have to improve the railroad, make it safe for pedestrians to cross, and so you can't negotiate with the railroad. They just tell you what it is and you have to do it. And it's like, whatever the cost is the cost. So the city stepped up and did that. So I thought it was particularly valuable. So that's kind of what it looks like today. Again, lessons learned, land acquisition is challenging and time consuming. It's better to leverage upfront public funding rather than TIF cash flow over time. I guess what I want to say with that is the DDA is helping funded this through their TIF, but the city was willing and able to kind of contribute some of these infrastructure costs to kind of get it going, which really helped close the gap for the developer to allow him to move forward. And again, it's not just Longmont, but overburdened regulation and bureaucracy can be a budget killer. And I deal with this in other projects. I'm working on a project now in Erie that, we call Erie Town Center. It's taken 24 months to get approved and 7 reviews. And just to get approval on something that's administrative. So these things can kill projects. And I know cities work to try to make it better and easier, but in terms of making the process easier from a regulatory standpoint is so, I think, really critically important. And I just want to, and this is not just a Longmont, but the ground floor commercial, leasing that is a challenge. If you go there today, there's still vacancy. And it's not just Longmont. You go to Superior Town Center, you go to these other places where the city mandated that you do ground floor commercial. It's a great idea, because you obviously want to activate that space, but the financial reality is, it's hard to lease up. It's a loss leader. Actually, it's a loss, in the sense it doesn't make the city developer money, and the longer that thing stays vacant, it's detrimental to the community as well. So a lot of cities, Boulder does it all the time, is mandating that ground floor commercial is part of the mixed use. I think it's a great idea, but it's hard to make the numbers work financially on that. So with that, turn it over to Tony. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, along with Longmont Urban Renewal Authority, did you know we had a revitalization and redevelopments? You did? I mean the people who are on city council and who are always at the city council meetings and who are part of city government. I didn't know we had it. And here we have Tony. Tony's here. He comes from, let's see, you've been in Aurora. Oh, sorry. You want to give your update?
So, my name's Tony Chacon, and actually, David did such a good job in Longmont, and when he left, they invited me to just kind of sit in the seat for a while. So, I can say I have not had as much success as David had, but I think that's part of my presentation, and I think David weighed in on that. This redevelopment, infill development, whatever you want to call it, it's not easy. There are just so many obstacles getting this stuff done, and we'll be going over that. So anyway, yeah, I was the immediate past executive director of the authority. I just recently retired from that position, and then also was a redevelopment manager at the same time. But I have 40 years of planning, and of that 40 years, 30 years has been in redevelopment and community revitalization. So my perspective here and what I'm going to talk about, it's not just about Longmont, it's just what I've learned over these years. And I can tell you a lot of the challenges we have here in Longmont are very similar to other communities. So we're not unique. We don't necessarily do things too much differently, and we all face the same challenges. So, density. Perceptions, real quick. I say I'm coming in with a project and I'm increasing density. What's the first thing out of everybody's mouth lately? Oh, no, that's too much. Oh, traffic. Oh, this. Oh, that. Density is bad. And the first perception, one of those perceptions is something like this. Well, let me tell you. Density can be a range of things. How many are familiar with Prospect? Would you call that a dense project? Would you believe that density is 3 to 4 times the density of our historic neighborhoods in Longmont? How many of you like that neighborhood? Think it's pretty cool? How many people across the nation love that neighborhood? Oh, it's on the national review every time when it comes to developments. Okay? You did what? Did you get priced out? So I just bring that up. And David pointed out too what people would consider high density projects. South Main Station in reality is not that dense. Can anybody explain why? No? Nope. What do they have? Parking. And where is that parking? It's all on surface, right? So what happens is I could build a similar, or have a similar project built, same number of units on half that parcel, the density would go to 100 units an acre. How many would object to 100 units an acre if somebody just came and said, I want to build a 100 unit acre apartment? A lot of objection, right? But what they're doing is they're building in parking in a structure that leaves other space for some other use. So, I want to frame everything around infill and redevelopment. So, how many here are aware that Longmont is landlocked? About half of you. So, what that means is Longmont doesn't have the ability to grow out anymore. And the land within the city is diminishing as development occurs. So, where does the growth go? We're going to bring that up in a minute. Right. So somebody said it needs to go up. And that's where density comes into play. And I think we need to start thinking about that and discussing that as a community. If we want to thrive into the future, how do we accommodate growth? Because it is inevitable. It's either going to happen here in Longmont, or where is it going to occur? Erie, which is even more problematic. Look east. Firestone, Frederick, going gangbusters on housing development. And where does that traffic go to? And where do they go through? Longmont, okay? So keep that in mind. So I want to talk about the density. So again, density is the optimization of land utilization. In other words, let's use the land to the best extent possible instead of spreading it out. Higher density on same acreage, more units, more property tax revenue. And I throw a little diagram here. So again, the blue, 10 acres at 5 units an acre. You could get 50 units on there. Whoa, nice number, right? Well, okay. What if you could get 15 units an acre on there? That's 150 units. That's 3 times the number of housing units that are contributing to the property tax base. Values are very comparable. There's this notion that the smaller the property, the less the property value. Not true. In the instance of Prospect, for example, what are those values? They're way up there, right? Unfortunately, and I'll kind of talk about that in a minute. But the other thing is, okay, you want to build 50 units still. You condense it to 3.5 acres. You've got all this other land to do something else with, possibly some public improvements in the community, some public space. So, the other factors on density is a reduced land cost per development lot in 2 scenarios. One, the land itself on a unit basis is cheaper, and in terms of installation of the infrastructure. So if you only have to put in infrastructure for that yellow area, that's a much smaller area than the big blue area. So the cost to the developer is much less. And the optimal utilization of existing infrastructure capacity. Within the urban air framework we have sewer lines, we have water lines. I can tell you, a lot of those are not being used to their maximum capacity. Parks, I would say some of them aren't being used to their maximum capacity. So again, you can bring infill development that helps in that manner. Potential to rejuvenate distressed or underutilized properties. We talked about blighted, dimensioned brownfields. So just to clarify, a brownfield site is a property that is either contaminated environmental conditions or is perceived to be contaminated. It actually doesn't have to have any contamination. So a lot of infill sites within a community, particularly in older areas, are considered brownfields. Enhances values on adjacent and nearby property. You will always hear this excuse, oh, that type of unit or that smaller lot is going to devalue properties in the neighborhood. There's the other side of the equation. In some cases, it actually increases. It's more about the quality of the development, not the quantity of development. And there's a scenario, the developer comes in to build 100 units. The community says, oh, well, let's drive it down to 50 units. Where do you think savings are going to be on the project? In the building product, right? You're not going to necessarily get the same quality product. Reduction in public safety and code enforcement costs to the city because you're filling in sites where there's problems already, and contributing to the upgrade or replacement of old or inadequate infrastructure. So a lot of times that infrastructure needs to be, it's old, it needs replacing. Somebody's got to fix it. So you can work in a partnership as part of that development, maybe to go ahead and fix it at their cost. Okay, growth impacts are inevitable. The city versus peripheral development. So if you build in city, it's closer to employment, goods, services, and it could reduce car use. So in other words, if you're closer to where the shopping center is, you might be more inclined to walk. Now, I pointed out there, could reduce. We are just so car-based that it's going to take time, but it could occur. Increased density provides more effective public transport options. So you've got clusters of people that are willing to use the public transit. You can then put routes in place that serve that population. Population to support the local businesses, increase in property and sales tax, and then more density equals more population, which equals more local sales, which then equals more tax revenue locally. And then also it puts the city in a stronger fiscal position over time, capable of sustaining its economic well-being, okay? So if you go to the outside, so again, growth's going to happen. It's going to go out the Firestone. Low density translate to need for car transport. So again, they're driving through Longmont. High volumes of pass-through traffic. Primary use of car travel to Longmont for goods and services also. So the Costco phenomenon, right? How many cars do you think that contributed to the traffic here in Longmont from places outside Longmont? Pretty significant. That's why you have the double turn lanes built in, due to that traffic coming from the east. Depreciating sales tax revenue as external communities attract their own goods and service providers. So initially, it's good for the city. Oh, we're getting people to come in here and buy stuff. Over time, they can get those same goods right there in their own community. Thereafter, you're not getting sales tax, but you're still getting their traffic possibly. And so, for example, I have heard there is a Target to go out somewhere in the Firestone area. It's not the big Target we're aware of, but it's still a Target. And then less new housing in Longmont equals to stagnant or reduced fees, taxes for public services and improvements. So again, as development diminishes, less revenue to the city. So, impact of design and regulation on infill development and redevelopment. First of all, I just want to point out these things. The lack of roadway interconnectivity contributes to congestion and traffic. So it's not so much the number of cars trips that are generated by development. It's how they traverse the community. And I can tell you, the grid street pattern is the most equitable means and the best means of distributing traffic and more reducing traffic volumes on streets. The worst thing that ever came along was curvilinear streets with cul-de-sacs. Who's the winner on a curvilinear street pattern? The person that has the cul-de-sac property. Who gets the shaft? That person that's on the collector street that connects to the arterial street. And so, on any design, you will actually see a movement, and I think Corcut may have talked something about this. There's a movement to better facilitate the interconnection of the roadway network. The reduction of the parcel size. So again, we talk about building up. So let's figure out how we reduce the parcel. If you got rid of that big patio on the back and put it on the roof, and you got rid of that big driveway, and with it that 20-foot setback of green lawn area, wow, that's a nice development pad in itself, and you could have a nice house on it. So, for example, on that, our regulation requiring a driveway of 20 feet, you're also adding on green space. Is that essential, that 20-foot setback of green space? And streets should be sized appropriately and fully utilized. And you notice I emphasize park it. Streets that are designed to have parking should park. And there's a lot of resistance anymore for people parking on streets. There's a lot of complaints. Oh, so-and-so's parking 2 cars on the street across from me. That is part of the street design. If it is part of that street design, use it. Euclidean zoning. The separation of land uses effectively, as we know it today, has gone amok. Can anybody tell me what year Euclidean zoning was authorized by the Supreme Court? Oh, hey, that's not fair. You teach this stuff, man. 1926. And over time, what happened is Euclidean zoning, well, first of all, its original intent was to separate non-complementary uses or dangerous uses from each other. So you didn't want a factory with smokestack next to a house. Over time, it actually became a regulatory tool to segregate population. And then it's kind of just embedded itself in our psyche that you have to separate land uses to the finest degree. So now you have separation. Oh, this zone district allows a lot of 5,000 square feet. This requires 10,000 square feet. And it goes on and on. So my premise on this is, can we move beyond 1926? Let's think about this a little bit better, how we go about doing this. The second thing is that larger cities, and Longmont is amongst those, we have a set of zoning requirements that apply across the city. But each sub-area within the city has some uniqueness to it. And we need to be able to understand what that uniqueness is and figure out our codes accordingly. Yeah. Euclid, so what it was a case, the town of Euclid, New York, right? Or Ohio. They went to court to say they could separate the land uses, and the court said they could do so. But at the time, it was more about factories from use, residential and commercial, not the commercial and residential necessarily. Again, it was for those unsafe uses adjacent to the population is what they were trying to separate. But over time, it's morphed into, that's why I say it's gone amok. Now it's so refined in terms of how you break it up into uses. And tell you the truth, that's the thing too, is the 50s, 60s, we separated commercial from residential to where we have the conditions we have today. Shopping centers over here, everybody lives way over here, and I would say all that has contributed to traffic issues. The challenge of applying suburban-based development requirements to infill and redevelopment, they don't work. They just do not work. Setback requirements, certain infrastructure requirements, things like that don't necessarily work. And so codes really need to look how they can refine themselves to be more supportive. And then the collective impact of development-related fees further impacts financial viability of products. So, of course, we try to put the cost or some portion of that cost onto the developer, and then over time we start adding fees and fees and fees. And the challenge isn't the fee itself, but it's it's like, well, it's just a small fee here, and then it's, well, let's put another fee here. Well, it's just a small fee, but collectively the fees can get out of control, and it's something that can impact the ability to do an infill project. And the challenge of market forces is pretty simple. It's money. It's all about money. And Dave kind of outlined it well. Land parcels in the urban setting are much more expensive than agricultural land. I can tell you, in the lower downtown area, we just acquired some property, or see acquired some property for the transit project, $30 a square foot. You can go out to Firestone area and you can pick up property at $7 a square foot. So there's a huge cost differential. Potential contamination issues. Smaller developers, as Dave said, they don't necessarily have as much financial backing. It's usually their own money, and so they don't have that ability to carry things. And then there's a tentativeness of financing institutions and equity partners to invest in physically and economically challenged areas. In other words, if they don't see that area as having the ability to get a significant return, they won't even look at investing in that area. And these redevelopment areas particularly, that's what happens pretty regular. And then there's a divergence between the cost of developing something and what their return could be either through rent or the sales point. So it might cost you on the equivalent of $3,000 a month rent for an apartment unit, but you can only in this particular market get $2,000, and there's a $1,000 discrepancy. So you have to figure out how to do that. And all that then leads to what they talk about is these public-private partnerships, providing maybe part of the answer to our problems. And with that, I appreciate all of you.
All right, let's take 5 to 7 minutes. Get a pint, do what you need to do, but no more than 7 minutes because we have some work to do. Okay? The taskmaster.
Alex, good to see you.
So I'm recording it on my phone. So we got it back. So what's the last one? Oh, you're here. Well, I'll let you do that.
Yeah, so I want to exactly.
Yeah, you know, it was one thing. Enriching, and they were expecting to have to do a really major repair.
Yeah.
But when you got in there, that fun, well, yes and no. They did do a little bit, but because there wasn't a big fix, there wasn't a big benefit on the back end. But what he found was that you're going to need a new So now it's injection or hydrochloric acid or something, whatever your cartilage is. So that's what's happening. So it was disappointing for her because she thought she kind of came out and said, wait a minute, what you said was going to happen. Didn't happen. And then there was a recovery period, and then it's like he still hurts. Yeah, so.
You may have to spread them out, yeah.
He thought so.
Hey, Carol. Greg wants to know about these classes coming up in September. All we can say is the last 3 Wednesdays are first September. 2 Wednesdays. 6 to 7 for next time I'll be because I know there's a number of times. All right, thanks. How's the trail?
Classes that Carol and Steve like to have going on. Really super.
Right. Yeah. I've attended a few of them that they did at the
What's next?
vocational school or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
No. It's all on White.
Yeah.
trail, a little bit on the side. Yeah.
And so has Diane.
Right. Yeah, we were both happy.
It's getting out there. So they're on a big long email list. So that's why
I'm hoping to have a good discussion and keep it simple.
everybody has stuff.
Yeah,
So
they have.
no, it's
They have.
just-
Tuesday is the open forum.
Right, yeah. I was gonna say, 6 p.m. start, Tuesday, 1 hour.
Is that?
Yeah, like, so I really, well, maybe this one, maybe. Yeah, it's like, oh, I gotta leave 1 hour. I gotta leave an hour early.
Why, where you were?
Get home, get some food.
Oh.
Take care of my neighbor's dogs who are in Europe.
Well, they really cut it off.
Right, I know.
They're pushing 15 minutes in.
So it's a different way of communicating. That's what I keep saying is, you go to the city council, nobody hears anything. And it's like, they're in front of their computers. I don't think they even see it. So they're not listening to you.
It's sometimes wonder if I'm just screaming into the void. And I think most of the time, that's true. Yeah.
So that was my thought is, how about, maybe this is a
I enjoy every time I've been to some event like this. There's only a handful, but we're fine. I was out of town a lot. What number is this from? That's 5. Yeah. I think this might be the first time I was in town.
Oh, okay. Then it's going to be the elected officials. Probably going to have Alex come up right? Aren't they going to have you on?
No, it's everybody who's participating. Somebody gets the microphone and just say what they're decided.
Oh, okay. When they have elected people who are running for office.
Yes, towards the end, after everybody gets their signatures.
Oh, okay.
They'll have.
I thought they were going to do like at large together.
In the future, yes, but today, no. It's just we're on top.
Hold on a second.
Yeah. So
This is coming up,
small groups and
Turkey.
go around.
Yes, it is. You know what, yes, we will have, we'll be passing it. Okay, let's find a seat, everybody. Hey, David. Hey, everybody. Back in the room, folks. Especially our speakers.
Walking outside with
All right, David, find a seat right here. Tony, up here. These are your 2 seats. David, Tony, up here. Come on up here. Have a seat. I didn't do anything. You were overseeing this. I'll see. Okay, everybody, let's find a seat. Let's find a seat. We're gonna get going. We got some work to do here tonight. Carol, come on up. Okay. All right. This is all about our Q&A now, in terms of taking a few minutes and asking our two speakers any questions you have at this point about their presentation or their perspective on things. And so we'll take a few minutes to do that before we get into the small group discussions. Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, so I know Gary has a question.
Hi, thank you, Gary Hodges. So I appreciated the presentations you just gave. And as I was sitting here, what it seemed like to me, I mean, a city is not a game of The Sims, if everybody knows what that is. And it just feels like that's what was being described, you know, a omnipotent overlord building a community for a bunch of mindless individuals with no agency. And you know, people want to live in places, and it's like you're disparaging the cul-de-sac. But if you asked, I believe, if you asked people who lived in apartments, going to apartment complexes, maybe by Walmart, so what would be your ideal place to live? Where would you want to live?
I think most people would say
The single family home in a cul-de-sac. So how do you balance your sim level or sim approach to city development with what I think most people would see as an ideal place to live?
So I didn't have his presentation, but I agree. So, you know, there's different housing at different life stages of development for everyone. And I completely agree. You know, I live in a single family house now. I used to live in an apartment. I used to live in a condo. Well, as a sidebar, the biggest problem in Colorado right now is the inability to build condominiums, which is usually the first entry into a for sale, affordable product to help build equity so you can move into a single family. And I came from the East Coast where it was much easier, but here, Colorado has never solved that, and there's no developers really building condos anymore. So I don't disagree. I mean, what? Why condos? So it's something called construction defect litigation. And so in Colorado, if you're a developer and you want to build a condo, you are virtually assured that you're going to get sued by these trial lawyers who kind of roam around the state and find any developer who wants to build a condo, because they say that you built the condo incorrectly, and they can count anything as a construction defect. And because of that, insurance providers, because you have to have insurance to, as part of the building, they charge like 3 or 4 times the typical insurance if you're to build an apartment building. And so a developer's like, I can't pay another $5 a foot or whatever it is to build a condo, so they just don't do it. And so the number of condo developers in Colorado have dropped down dramatically. We were under contract with a condo developer for our Erie Town Center project to build 85 condos, which has been a great part of our community. December, they reached out to us and said, we're out. We can't get insurance. And so it's back to the drawing board. We're looking at maybe apartments or townhomes, but that inability to provide a, say, 300 to 400K for sale product in Colorado is being severely diminished, unfortunately. So every year, the state legislature every year tries to solve it. They just kick the can, to be honest. They haven't solved it. They have not solved it. And I'm not an expert on this, but they try to make things easier or make it less challenging for to be sued for a developer. But to be honest, it hasn't moved the needle as much as we hoped. And it's just a business, a product line of condos just is not being built, and developers aren't doing it.
Back to your question, sorry for that. So I am not suggesting that we would look to mow down all these neighborhoods that currently exist.
some are. Yeah. We have people coming to council who want to just blow zoning.
I'm giving you my perspective, okay? I understand your perspective to some degree, but we are not imploring developers to come in and destroy good existing neighborhoods. And there's a range of people that have different interests. I would contend not everybody wants a single-family house with a large yard that they have to maintain and necessarily on the cul-de-sac. But just let you know, the codes sometimes drive developers to build a certain type of product. And that's what I was just trying to point out there. So again, I don't disagree with you, and I'm not saying that old developments that had cul-de-sacs. It was an idea at the time, and some of that product was good. Yes. Wait.
Are you both developers? And what I'm not understanding is you said that you worked one time with the city of Longmont and now you do. Okay, but are you working with the city council? Who are you working with? And then we don't want more apartments. We really don't. It's causing too much congestion here. So what is the solution? I mean, if you look at Cherry Creek, it's the school district, it's the shopping, it's the housing developments, it's the school district, it's the school district, it's the school district. And what is your role in all of this? And you were saying that you work, because when you first came up, I thought, okay, you're on the city council, and you're not, but you're working with them. And so can you explain that more, please? Thank you.
So I used to work as a staff for the city of Longmont from 2011 to 2018. So I was redevelopment manager and did the urban renewal authority. I left in 2018 to become a consultant and then to do development. So so I don't work with city council. I don't do any of that. I mean, I have a business partner. We're trying to develop some housing here in Longmont, missing middle housing by the creek, by St. Vrain Creek. But I consult with communities, public and private, throughout the state of Colorado, helping them on pre-development. But yeah, I don't have any interaction with council today, I'm trying to get a project entitled here in Longmont. Yeah.
So on the development, so I was staff with the city. So we basically implemented policies of the city council. That's our role, okay? I was talking in perspective as to me as a professional over the years. I'm not talking on behalf of the city in this regard. But I'd like to say that there are some areas that apartments aren't advantageous. But there are other areas where single family just is not going to happen. Lower downtown, do you think single family homes are going to go in there? And if they are, how much would they cost? On a unit basis, they do not. Right now, the market is such. Right now, today, it is cheaper to rent an apartment than it is to buy a house with a mortgage. That's the truth. You can look it up.
Hold on a second. I'm going to move this conversation along, and I'm going to invite you, if you can come back on August 7th. I don't know if you're around that, because we're talking affordable Longmont, that night. So that's another conversation for the night. Jake Corkins had his hand up, and I'm going to come back to Jake and then Mike, and then we may end up with.
I just want to clarify something. Not everybody wants cul-de-sac anymore. The new generation predominantly prefers smaller units. These are the demand studies, you can look it up, where amenities are provided. So they prefer amenities against isolation, because when you are in the cul-de-sac, you're isolated. So it's not just the apartment versus single family. It's what is around you that creates that preference as well. But that's the truth. There is a new generation, meaning that 18 to 35-year-old today predominantly prefer smaller lots, smaller units, if there are amenities around.
Okay, I'm going to keep on moving on. That was just a commentary by Corkin. Jake has a question back here.
Yeah, you mentioned our code, and one of the things that I'm curious about, and it's not necessarily within the code, but it's the IHO, the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance for the city, and I've had enough developers in the process of running for council and talking to developers and talking to folks tell me pretty clearly that part of the reason that development has, or the developers are choosing to build rental units and apartment complexes is because it's cheaper within our IHO in the city of Longmont to develop apartment complexes than it is to build for sale units. I'm curious about your perspective on that and whether or not you think there's a path forward where we can change some of those regulatory structures to incentivize for sale housing.
Thank you for your thoughtful question, Jake. Here we go. Who wants to tackle this first?
So if I remember correctly, Longmont, the city, dramatically, did they double the IHO, the fee in lieu for rent and for sale? And I know they raised it, but the for rent per square foot is definitely less than a for sale. And what developers mostly do, they just pay the fee in lieu, versus you can, as a developer, provide that on-site at that AMI level. But the economics of the deal are, typically developers, when you run the numbers, is like, well, it's better financially if I just pay the fee, and the fee goes to the city's or affordable housing fund, and then the affordable, the city affordable housing fund can use to build affordable housing somewhere else, through their fund. So I think it's very rare for developers to build affordable housing at, say, a 80 to 120 AMI, which is middle income housing, or even a 50 to 80, which is, then you get into LIHTC, which is a low income housing tax credit deal. It just doesn't make sense financially. But I don't know why, how they come up with that number. There's a whole, mechanics around how they determine what it is, and then they pass that cost. I know in Boulder, it's way more, but they have a much more, obviously, bigger issue with affordable housing there. So I don't know if that answers your question very well, but but again, back to for sale, because for sale is for condos, and no one's building condos, so no developer is going to be doing inclusionary housing on a condo because they just don't build condos. So construction is you just go back to apartments. What I would love to see in Longmont, and I'm trying to find a site, is something called cottage court communities. You've ever seen these? I think these are very cool, which are it can be a for sale product that's small scale, it can be single family with ADUs, but again, it's about community, and it's orienting. You've seen some best practice. I saw one in Bend, Oregon, where you have housing oriented around kind of a public space, and you have a communities thing. I think something like that in Longmont would be great. It's just finding the land to do it, and try and talk to the city to see if there's some opportunities. But again, if you know of any kind of opportunities to do cottage courts, I think that could be a niche market for Longmont. That's not apartments, not 300 units here and there. It's not townhomes. It's not single family. But again, it can help address someone or a family or whoever that wants to provide, wants to live in a community that's kind of more community oriented. So just throw that out there.
So I would say I don't believe the fees are driving developers to do multifamily. Just let you know, there's different segments in the development community. There are those that build single family. They do not build multifamily. And so that segregates the two. I would also say that the fee alone, that the inclusionary housing fee alone, and to tell you the truth, the cities at 12% is really not too bad considering other communities, is most probably not the most significant variable from a regulatory cost. There are numerous other fees added up that most probably collectively are more of a burden. What I'd like to say is, though, on the inclusionary housing fee, the idea is, as development occurs, of course, residential development, whether it's apartments or whether it's single family, that they pay this fee. And so over time, you're raising revenue to apply to provide affordable product. The problem is, especially in Longmont, given the fact that we're constrained land-wise and we're running out of land to build on, as that land is built, there's less and less development that's going to occur. So you have a diminishing return of that 12% fee to the city's fund. And so in reality, it's not a sustainable means of generating money for affordable housing. So I just wanted to point that out.
I'm going to get to you, Tess. Mike had his hand up. Then I'm going to go Mike. I'm going to go over here to Rick. I'm going to go Tess. Keep the order. And then we'll keep it quick.
Try to keep this quick. So my experience with the construction defects laws, it's really restricted the ability of disadvantaged communities to build wealth within their families. Allowing them to buy small, affordable units, it's really a direct assault on equity in the community. And really, perversely, assaulting those people is trying to protect the construction defects law. The other part of it is single-family homes. To speak to the gentleman who talked about that, that also is an assault on the ability of disadvantaged, underprivileged families to build wealth, because it shifts the burden of infrastructure cost. If you understand the cost of infrastructure for single-family homes is not borne by the taxes, or not sufficient to cover the long-term burden of that infrastructure replacement. That tax burden is borne by lower middle-class families. It's a complicated issue. If you look up Urban 3, a group, they have wonderful videos online to talk about how a single-family home really shifts the burden of infrastructure costs from lower middle-class communities, or from wealthy single-family homeowners onto those that can least afford to pay for it.
So there is homework for you. The budget, the Longmont budget is in here. The percentage that comes from fees, the percentage that comes from property taxes. Dan Wolford asked me, what is this map? I found the most decent map I could for boundaries, just knowing we are a little landlocked because of open space, because of the great things that we have done in Boulder County, open space, and both from the county and from the city. I couldn't find that map. But if you go through and start to think about where does the money come from that runs the city, and then where does the money go to, and then also I put in from the revitalization, the Main Street corridor and how they're looking at it, and the other growth areas that are in the planning. There's a lot of information online, so I would just encourage you to get online. Who's next? Tess?
So my question is, I've started to see a lot of signs popping up around town where they're taking open space signs from the election, I think a couple of years ago, and they're adding to it, like, protect open space from private development. And so I was curious if that is something, because you guys have all talked about how we're landlocked, if that's something that's starting to be considered to help mitigate these issues we're having with growth.
Get him, Dan.
Yeah, I've seen the signs going up too. As far as I know, there's no movement to. Oh wait, we do have a counselor here to speak about that. Okay, let her answer it, because like I said, I'm clueless, but I have seen the signs. Okay.
Yeah, and also Dan Wolford in the back. I am Susie Hidalgo-Ferring. I'm Mayor Pro Tem to the City of Longmont. And so I do want to speak to the signs that are coming out, and that is actually of a possible land exchange that we were looking at from the Distal and told that those are the names of the properties. Where one was purchased with open space dollar, and the other was purchased with public space dollar. And the idea was to switch them, looking at a cost-effective plan to build a composting facility in conjunction with the county. And the reason why was the cost-effectiveness, with that there was infrastructure already in the one property that's bought with open space that is that is that we were looking at to put the composting space in. The other property is actually in the floodplain, and so there would have been a lot of mitigation to get it coordinated. The belief, as we were looking at this, the precedents that it set. So even though through our ordinance we are allowed to do an action like this, it opens the door for tapping into public space and, kind of navigating it if the city council, whichever city council ahead of time decides that, you know what, I want this open space for land. We're still looking at the legalities behind that, but I feel like we're kind of at a point where it's going to set a precedence. So Kanemoto, that has not come to us yet, so we haven't. I know that was the county. So, but we can talk offline afterwards. I know I'm getting the mic.
I'm gonna pull the mic from her because after session 8, we are gonna have 4 sessions with candidates, and those are. And I have this vision of being out in the garden and having a really big group.
The list of growth factors that you had up there, it seems to me one of the biggest is employment, where people work. And that is the reason I drove home the other day on 52. When you drive west, you're fine. But the line of cars going east is unbelievable. And my question is, how much control in terms of growth does the city have on where people work?
Well, effectively, the city only has control within its jurisdictional boundaries, right? But usually cities get together on a cooperative basis, and so Longmont's cooperated with Boulder. I would say this is. I go back in age, so I can kind of bring this up. So Boulder, for example, just decided to seek employment with really no consultation on the nearby communities. And so what happened is they became a magnet for employment, which not only affected those surrounding communities, but affected their own community, right? So I would say now governments in this area is more inclined to work to some degree to alleviate some of the conditions as a result of that. But you've got to also understand every city is effectively a home rule city, and so they all want their own tax base. And so to some degree, they're going to be fighting for employment opportunities within those communities, and they don't necessarily think about the impacts on adjoining communities. But again, that's where dialogue is important.
Maybe some room for some visualization. I'm going to go back to Dan, and I'm going to come up here. Go ahead.
Thanks, guys, for your presentations. Crystal ball, similarities and differences between the turkey factory and the sugar mill, and knowing the length of time the turkey factory before it got developed. What do you think that magic number is for the sugar mill? All right, crystal ball time. Crystal ball time. Here we go. Okay.
So when I came to the city in 2011, the owner of the sugar mill, Dick, has owned it since the 1970s. I know there's like a stack of legal docs is high about the city role, and because as you know, the sugar mill is not in the city; it's unoccuped by Boulder County, but everyone thinks it's in the city, and so there's a liability issue. And so the cleanup costs associated with the asbestos, I know that, and the owner is cooperating with the potential developer to help do these cleanup costs. But in the 8 years I was there, tried to move the needle just a little bit, just nothing really happened. But I think there's a good potential partner that has experience in brownfields and can do this. The big question is, does the city want to? It has to get annexed in. If to do anything. And is the city interested and willing in council to take on that liability and what that liability looks like as part of any potential redevelopment? Because, you know, the developers propose all kinds of commercial, retail, residential, and so forth. So it's a great site. It's got great view. I mean, they keep having fires there. So, I mean, I don't know how much of it's still sustainable in terms of like being, you know, structurally sound, but I just don't know. I mean, it depends on this property owner and his willingness, because there has been I think a disagreement between the developer and the city about the water. Because back in the day, there was a giant water tap that was called a terminal water service agreement. So when they made sugar out of sugar beets back in the early 1900s, that it processed millions of gallons of water. Once that use went away, meaning sugar beets, that tap went away. But so there's a value to that. So if you're facilitating redevelopment, I think the city would need to consider that water at some capacity, whether they're willing to do something or nothing. I mean, for Butterball, they were. But water's part of it. Environmental cleanup is another one. I mean, it's a big number. So.
Yeah, so of course Dave threw it my way when I came on board, and pretty much the same walls. Yeah, so just let you know, so the savior to that area, there would be two elements. One that's brought into the city limits, and then it can be brought into the urban renewal area. And by virtue of being brought into the urban renewal area, it can bring significant financial resources to the table to get the deal done. My understanding is the city is really going to start pushing to get something done with that property more sooner. I'd say within the next 5 years, you may see some level of activity on that property. Won't be completed, because the project alone, I would say, is going to be a 10 to 15 year development project.
If you bring money in, do you lose control over the vision of where it goes? If you bring it into that?
Actually, then we're part.
Okay, all right, here we go. Hi, I'm Martin. If there ever was blight, boy, that's the blighted spot right there. Holy cow! Holy cow! Drive by there, it's unbelievable. There's the trash and the filth. But great property, great property. What I hear oftentimes from like tonight and other places is that growth is good. And when can we say that that's enough? How long is unlimited growth sustainable? When the city has a budget and we're saying we're going to add more money to the city's coffers by more growth, more development, when is it enough? When do you say, we have a good stasis here, we're generating a lot of money with our taxes, we have somewhat manageable traffic? When can we say, good, that's enough? Or when we have limited amount of land to keep expanding onto, but we're always going to be saying more growth, then you're going to start seeing houses started getting bulldozed. That's what's going to happen. So growth can't go on forever.
I think that's the elephant in the room. Great question. Thank you, David.
I just flipped the question. So I guess when you say growth, do you mean residential growth or commercial growth? Because right now, Longmont's got a jobs housing imbalance, meaning we have more residents than we do have jobs. So in planning terms, we always talk about 1-to-1, where you have the same number of jobs for the same number of residents. Not everyone would work and live in the same community, but the goal is to provide opportunities for people to live and work in the same community. Obviously, residential growth has impacts on services through the city budget in terms of cost of services. Commercial development, obviously, if you come in and work and you leave, it's less impactful. But if you have the right retail and whatever, that the city can capitalize on retail sales from people that may not live in the community but work here, that would help support the general fund, which goes to helping to pay staff and so forth.
Tony didn't want much to do with it.
Yeah, I think at some point there's some capacity issue, but growth will always be there. So communities, they grow old, they turn over, people turn over, right? Buildings turn over. At some point, some houses just go to basically need to be redone. And so that's where I see, like, at some point, the growth is not accommodating everybody wants to move here. It's a matter about reinvigorating your community. Otherwise, I'll tell you, you get in communities like Inglewood, a situation like Inglewood had a few years back. What did Inglewood have to do? Anybody remember? They started losing revenue big time. They had to basically dissolve their fire department and contract with Denver. And to this day, and I have friends there, to this day they're struggling because they don't have any growth. It's diminishing growth. They actually have negative growth, which is contributing to significant problems. So, I think it's the degree of growth that's the most compelling question to talk about.
Yeah, that may not have been a satisfactory, because that's a difficult, complex question, and I get that. And so I think everyone kind of wants to strike, where's the equilibrium at between how fast we grow or not grow, and kind of remaining where we're at. And so how do we juggle and find that balance, that equilibrium in a way that meets our needs, continues the services that people need, and keep our community reinvigorated, renewed, and revitalized. And so, I don't know if anyone's come up with that formula. I don't think anybody has, but I think we're working on it. Go ahead.
So, somewhat to the question on the board and to the thing you talked about in terms of condominiums, would it be helpful because that seems like a starter point for people, to your point, to build some wealth at a lower rate, in terms of what we can do? Can we call the governor, Congress people? What can we all do to help you with that?
That is a great question.
I mean, in terms of the state legislature stuff, I guess what I would like in terms of the role of the community is more YIMBYism, to be honest. Yes in my backyard kind of thing. So it's a challenge to, with regulations today, obviously, if you want to build anything, inevitably it's going to come through planning commission or city council. And this is a good part of the democratic process where the community has a chance to provide input. There's lots of things that go on that the community is not entirely aware of, especially with P3s and public-private partnerships and the role of certain projects to be catalysts to help spur the right type of growth. I just think there's a lot of times, when you don't say anything, maybe you support something, but you don't say anything, but that's not what comes out in terms of a project that's desired in the community, and it's the voices, the loudest voices. What's that? As part of a public hearing or a public process in terms of the community. I'm just talking about Longmont, just a development project. At the state level, back to your question, like with construction defect litigation, I don't know, to be honest, how that works. I know there's so many people working to like move the needle so that you can build that affordable for sale product at a $300 to $350 price point, but I just don't know how that's solved where a local person could do that.
I would say, again, that legislation is at the state level. So number one, you got your local representatives. You can talk to them, really reach out. I think it also is a stronger voice if you have a collection of people that come together with them. Because sometimes, you know, they're like, okay, you're one up. But I will tell you, the biggest challenge at the state legislative level is the lobbying of the lawyer guild. That is pretty the reality of it. They are the ones that want the litigation. And it was mentioned, so here's the thing. So let's say you have 100 units and one unit has a leaky window. They go to court. Instead of allowing the developer to fix that window, none of the windows may have a problem. They will go to court and require the entire development windows to be replaced. Or, better yet, you give a financial contribution to the HOA to fix the problem. And then it's off the developer's back to fix the problem. Does the HOA fix the problem? We just don't know. So that is the biggest obstacle. And I think that's the problem, is there's not been a groundswell of the general public out there to say, this is ludicrous. You have effectively stopped a segment of the development community. And as a result, all we're getting is apartments, right? Because they don't have anything in between to build. And so I think that is most probably the best thing to do, is get organized or join groups that will go to the legislature or the local representatives and say, look, this is ludicrous. We need to have a resolution that allows us to move forward. I'll tell you right now, about 7% of the entire housing stock being built in Colorado is townhomes. Prior to the legislation, it was more in the range of almost 20%. That's how damaging that legislation has been.
Thank you. No, we're not gonna do the small group tonight. We're not gonna do small groups. So
I just didn't want to be disrespectful of your vision. So, but.
Talking around.
If it is where it goes, I'll be here. I will be here.
Okay, that'd be fine. Thank you. My name's Amy, and I was just wondering. I think about driving around town, and I understand the density. And I'm not trying to make you answer any questions about growth, because there's so many things. That's just a very ambiguous term. But what I'm wondering is, when you look at some of the commercial developments, they're not very dense relative to these promotions of dense apartments for people to live in. And I'm not trying to cast any shade, because I think I don't want to make this sound like any sort of personal attack, but like I think of the mall, it's just a big expanse and it's all just one level buildings. Like, what about building up for retail where people don't necessarily care? Just take an elevator up, you're not living there, but you can then maybe have more space in your private life. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So I guess I get back to like a small scale developer versus a formulaic big retail developer. They look at second floor retail and they're like, no way, Jose. Financing, the banks don't like it. It's an untested market. It's an untested product type. So unfortunately, so that's why you have this consolidation of developers in the country, that the only ones that are surviving that can carry a product for carry a site for 8 years are these big developers. And so I'm part of this small scale developer group. If you ever want to check this out, the guy's name is Jim Hyde. He has a book called Small Scale. It's unbelievable. He does these small scale developer workshops throughout the country, but it's more of these entrepreneur developers that want to make impacts in the community and really try to address gaps in the market, but provide really products and developments that the community likes, whether it's a cottage court community or taking an old gas station and converting it into a food court with containers of different, if you go to downtown Durango on Main Street, there's an old gas station there that they converted into a food hall court. It's just really kind of cool, and it's a big destination and driver. So I just think the financial markets really drive the developer, and they know certain product type, whether it's a 3-story, stick-built, garden-style apartment, 200 units. They'll finance that thing all day long. But if you want to do something different, banks don't like it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point there. So the one thing is, again, what we're talking about is infill and redevelopment. Provide that opportunity to maybe provide a different type of commercial product. And what it takes sometimes is you need to incent them to change their attitude. So again, the developer. So again, I don't develop. I don't build anything. It's too risky. But so the thing is, it's like so they're backers, they're financial backers, right? If you can reduce their risk to some degree, they're more inclined to work with you to provide the product you're looking for. And really though, those big corporate entities, they don't need any incentives because they got so much money they could care less. But I truly believe, and I think you do too, that going forward, the opportunities lie in working with smaller developers that then local financial institutions, and Longmont has a number of local institutions, smaller bank institutions that are willing to work with these parties. So I think that's going forward where the opportunities lie.
All right, Susie, I'm gonna let Susie have the last word because we're over time.
Thank you. Okay, so we recently approved and to align our ordinances with the state policy around ADUs. And one of the things I'm hearing from a lot of residents, especially those who are trying to build ADUs for their IDD children, so individuals with developmental delays, or their senior parents, is the fees. So looking at those permitting fees, and it's really unattainable. So we can make all these changes in our zoning, but it's unattainable. So what recommendations, and I would have pulled you in the office, but you all had to go and retire on me. So, so I'm asking you now.
So you asked me about fees for building ADUs. So here's, I just saw, so I don't know if Longmont does this, but if you want to build an ADU, does the city require you to do a new, accessory dwelling unit, so it could be an apartment above a parking, above your parking in your back or whatever, or a basement too. So, but if you have a separate unit, does the city of Longmont require you to do a new tap? Meaning, a typical home has like a 3/4 inch water tap that costs, here in Longmont, I don't know, $30K. So I know in Louisville, they just had an ordinance go that if you want to build an ADU, you can use that existing tap because you have plenty of capacity. So I guess one thing to incentivize ADUs is to allow the homeowner to use the existing 3/4 inch tap versus sometimes they make you do another tap, which adds to the cost and makes it not burdensome. So Louisville, I just saw this, they had it on their council agenda for like this week. But I don't know if Longmont does that. And sewer tap, yeah, so, yeah, water and sewer taps. So sewer tap will be a % of the water tap.
So, yeah, attainability. So the one thing communities can do, there's a tendency that you put all sorts of site development requirements on an ADU and limitations on how you can use it. They're extremely burdensome. I mean, I know a person that tried to do it, cost them $15,000 just to get plans prepared. And so that's number one. I think really looking hard and fast at your regulation. Number two is there's the assumption that people are going to be able to afford that, to build that ADU. Well, you've got to have a huge amount of equity in your property to get a bank to approve it. What if you don't have that equity and you'd like to do it and you're trying to meet the goal of attainability, right? Affordability, attainability. My suggestion is that the leadership needs to figure out how you can work with the local financial institutions to make funding available to build these things. Because access to the capital would increase the number of units that likely could be built or would be built in the community. So that's just my suggestion.
Okay, we're going to close up the shop tonight. So no, I just want to thank all of you at the top of this list here. Thank you, thank you. I want to thank you two guys too for hanging in there. But I also want to thank you for your civil discourse, your civility, your respectfulness. And this is a complex issue, very complex issue.
Is there going to be a grade on this? Are we going to be checked? What's going on?
Yeah, it's a take-home test. Okay, hey, everybody, have a good evening, drive safely. Hey, one last thing. The next 3 sessions are affordable Longmont, transportation infrastructure, and making an impact. We'll see you here in 2 weeks. Thank you.